The night was so dark that the snow seemed to be the only source of light. Victor awoke with a distinct feeling of being watched. There were no footsteps, no sounds, just a heavy silence, thick as congealed tar. He propped himself up in bed, listening to the forest outside his cabin. There was no wind, no creaking of the frozen trees, no coyote howls, just an absolute stillness, the kind that settles before a storm, or something else entirely, something that shouldn't be. And then a scratching, soft, almost tentative, as if whatever was making it didn't want to startle him. Victor froze. A dull, distant anxiety rippled through his chest, but he remained still, listening intently. The scratching came again, a little more insistent this time. He slowly rose, his bare feet meeting the icy plank floor. His gaze darted to the window. Beyond it, only darkness and the snow glinting under the moonlight. Yet he felt a presence, as if someone was out there just beyond the edge of human perception. Click! His fingers found the flashlight on the table, and Victor sharply pressed the button. The beam of light pierced the glass. He froze. On his porch, 2 wolves stood in deadly stillness, massive, rimed with frost, their breath pluming in white clouds from their muzzles. They weren't snarling, weren't moving, just watching. Their eyes, not wild, not hungry, but piercing, almost intelligent. And that made it even more terrifying. Victor gripped the flashlight tighter. He'd seen wolves in his life. As a park ranger, he'd encountered packs, cautious but unpredictable. He knew their nature. If they came to a human dwelling, something was wrong with them. But these, they hadn't just come. They were waiting. He took a step closer to the door. The wolves didn't flinch. Only one swayed slightly, and that's when Victor saw it. Blood on its paw. Thick, dark, already congealed, injured. The anxiety within him shifted to bewilderment. Why weren't they leaving? Why weren't they afraid? And then he noticed something else. In the snow, beside the wolves, were tracks. A third set, but not wolf tracks. Human, or not? Victor held his breath, scrutinizing the imprints. The tracks were enormous, unlike any he had ever seen. They led into the woods, but some of them seemed to appear from nowhere, as if someone had stood there a minute ago and vanished. A chill ran down his spine. The wolves continued to wait. Victor took a final breath and reached for the lock. Open the door, or leave them out there in the darkness? But what if they weren't the only ones who had come to his house tonight? You're on a channel with original stories. All names and locations have been changed. Subscribe, like, and watch to the end. Let's begin. Victor stood frozen at the threshold, watching the wolves. They remained motionless, yet their eyes never left him. The biting cold air snaked into the cabin, but he hesitated. Letting them in went against every instinct. Anyone who lives in the wilderness knows wild animals don't seek human warmth without a reason. But what if they simply had no choice? Victor slowly pulled the door inward, making a barely perceptible gesture with his hand. The wolves didn't rush in like frightened dogs, didn't snarl or bare their teeth. They entered smoothly, almost silently, as if this cabin were already familiar to them. Only a faint squeak of the wooden floorboards under their heavy paws broke the tense silence. Closing the door, Victor flicked on the switch of his lantern, filling the room with a soft, golden glow. The wolves paused in the middle of the room, their breath still misting in the cool air. Victor watched them survey their surroundings, not with wariness or curiosity, but as if weighing something. deciding whether to trust him. His gaze fell on the injured wolf. Its right front paw was stained with dried blood, trails stretching through its thick fur, but the wound looked fresh. He narrowed his eyes. This wasn't an accidental injury. Wounds like this came from traps or knives. Victor slowly crouched down, avoiding any sudden movements. The wolves continued to watch. The injured one lay down, carefully extending its paw. The second wolf remained standing, slightly shielding its companion, not threateningly, but alertly. "Easy there," Victor murmured, more to himself than to them. He retrieved his first aid kit from the shelf and unzipped it. Inside there were still bandages, rubbing alcohol, antiseptic cream, everything he'd used on himself before when he'd foolishly cut a hand or leg in the woods. He ran his fingers through the wolf's fur, feeling the injury. The wolf flinched but didn't pull away or snap. Its breathing quickened, but it allowed him. Victor carefully cleared the fur around the wound and frowned. A deep, almost clean cut, as if... He ran his fingers a little further, and his hand froze. Fabric, a tiny scrap tangled in the fur. Victor carefully pulled it out, bringing it closer to his eyes. Dark, dense material. Even by touch, he knew it was human clothing. Perhaps someone's jacket. Perhaps whoever left it also left this wound. Victor clenched the find in his palm. The wolf looked directly at him, as if understanding what he was now realizing, as if giving him time. "Who did this?" Victor asked softly, though he knew there would be no answer. The second wolf took a step closer. A barely audible crunch of its paw on the floor, a slight shift in the air, but Victor felt the movement in every cell of his body. They weren't here by chance. Something dangerous had driven them out of the woods. He took a deep breath and began his work. First, he cleaned the edges of the wound with rubbing alcohol. The wolf twitched an ear, but didn't move. Then he gently applied antiseptic. The last step was to bandage it securely, but not too tight. All this time, the second wolf never took its eyes off him. "Finished," Victor murmured, stepping back. The wolf carefully lifted its paw, trying to put weight on it. Then it looked at Victor. Their gazes met, and for a second he thought he saw understanding in those amber eyes. That the wolf realized, this human was not an enemy. Victor exhaled, stood up, and looked at the door. Wolves inside, darkness outside, the tracks of a third creature he'd seen in the snow. That meant someone else was out there. That evening, he did all he could. He treated the wolf's wound, making sure they showed no aggression. When the tension eased a bit, he fed them his leftover food, then sat by the fireplace, watching the wolves settle on the floor. They didn't fall asleep immediately, but soon their breathing became regular. Victor himself didn't notice his eyelids growing heavy and his thoughts beginning to blur. He drifted into a shallow, uneasy sleep, filled with restless shadows and distant echoes of footsteps. Something inside him knew the night would not be peaceful. Victor woke with a jolt, as if someone had nudged him, but the room was silent. The fire in the hearth had burned down, leaving only the soft crimson glow of embers. The smell of wood smoke mingled with the cold seeping through the cracks in the walls. But that wasn't what woke him. A wolf. It stood by the door, the same one that had been injured, now resting on all four paws, but not moving. It was just watching. Its eyes reflected the tiny light from the fireplace, two amber flames, piercingly fixed on the darkness beyond the threshold. Victor didn't immediately understand what was happening until he noticed that the wolf was waiting. No threat, no fear, just anticipation. Slowly, without breaking eye contact, Victor pulled on his jacket, picked up his flashlight, but didn't switch it on immediately. He approached the door, trying not to make a sound. The second wolf raised its head from its spot by the fireplace, but made no noise, simply watching him. He opened the door. The night was silent, the forest frozen, the snowdrifts undisturbed by even a single movement. Victor inhaled the frosty air, stepping onto the porch, feeling the packed snow crunch under his boots. Then he saw it. A little further, at the edge of the trees, barely visible in the faint moonlight, stood a silhouette. Human? Animal? It wasn't moving, but Victor felt that he was also being watched. The sensation was strange, not just a gaze upon him, but something more deliberate, as if the stranger wasn't just observing, but waiting for a reaction, a step, a movement, a word, as if this moment was predetermined, and Victor found himself in it by no accident. He slowly raised the flashlight, switched it on, directing a narrow beam of light between the tree trunks, and then something stirred. The figure took one hesitant step back, then another, but instead of fleeing, it seemed to be biding its time. Victor squinted and noticed tracks in the snow. They were deep, uneven. The person had been limping. "Who's there?" he asked quietly, but in the night his voice sounded alien to him. There was no answer. The wolf, which had been standing beside him all this time, suddenly made a sound. It wasn't a usual howl, more like a low, guttural sound, like a signal. The second wolf sprang up, its head raised, and then the figure turned and vanished into the woods. Victor took a step forward, but the wolf stood in his path, not threateningly, but firmly, as if an invisible boundary separated him from whatever lurked in the night. The wolf slowly raised its head, listening intently, then bared its teeth almost imperceptibly, showing no overt aggression, but making it clear, no further. Victor froze, feeling a cold wave of instinctive understanding rise within him. Whatever was in the woods, it should not be disturbed. His fingers tightened on the flashlight. Inside, there was a sense of unease, but not because of the person he had just seen, but because that person knew him. In the morning, Victor woke earlier than usual. What had happened during the night bothered him. The figure in the woods, the tracks that vanished, and the wolves' strange behavior. They knew more than they let on. He wrapped himself in his jacket, pulled on his gloves, and checked his backpack. A couple of water bottles, a knife, a first aid kit, a flashlight, and some food. His usual setup for a long trip into the woods. The wolves sat by the threshold, watching his every move intently. They didn't seem alarmed, but he felt they were also waiting for something. "You gonna show me where those tracks lead?" Victor murmured, closing the cabin door. One of the wolves turned its head toward the trees, then, without looking back, set off into the forest. Victor followed, the second wolf bringing up the rear of their small procession as if guarding their flank. The snow crunched under his boots with every step. The air was crisp and biting. Victor walked in silence, wondering who the person he'd seen last night could be. Was it someone who had escaped the wilderness, being pursued? Or, conversely, a hunter seeking prey? After about 40 minutes of travel, the wolves suddenly stopped. Victor noticed something strange ahead, a spot where the snow was disturbed and bush branches were broken. He took a few more steps and realized he was in an area where something bad had recently occurred. A camp, destroyed, remnants of a campfire, scattered items, imprints of several pairs of feet in the snow. Here and there, dark bloodstains were visible, already frozen stiff. Victor slowly moved forward, looking around. Things were strewn about as if someone had left in a hurry, or worse, had been driven out. Near an overturned backpack, he saw a woman's scarf, red, thin. It stood out conspicuously against the gray forest. Victor picked it up, rubbing it between his fingers. The fabric was damp from the snow, but not so much that it had been lying there for too long. "Who are you?" he murmured, continuing to survey the camp. The tracks indicated at least 3 people had been there. 2 moved erratically. 1 was limping. He squinted, recalling the tracks he'd seen last night. A limp. That person. It was him. At that moment, the wolf standing nearby suddenly jerked its head up, staring intently into the woods. Victor immediately turned, his fingers instinctively reaching for the knife on his belt. In the silence of the forest, a rustle sounded. Victor stepped forward, heading towards the sound. A few steps away among the trees, someone was there. "Who's there?" His voice was even, but inside he felt every muscle tense. The answer was a faint moan. Victor took another step and saw a woman. She was sitting, her back against a tree trunk, her face pale, her lips cracked from the cold. Her hair was matted, and a deep scratch, which she was clutching with bloody fingers, was visible on her left arm. Damn! Victor knelt beside her, examining her. The woman's eyes slowly rose to meet his, and in them was something strange. Not fear, not relief. Recognition. "You shouldn't be here." Her voice was weak, but firm. "And who are you?" Victor pulled out his flask and offered it to her. She hesitated at first, then took a few small sips. "Leah," she exhaled. He looked at the scarf in his hand. "Is this yours?" Leah nodded. "I was looking for the wolves," she added after a short pause. Victor narrowed his eyes. "Looking for them? Or pursuing them?" She shook her head, pressing her hand against the wound again. "You don't understand," she whispered. "It's dangerous here." "I see that." He nodded towards the camp. "It looks like someone was looking for you." Leah frowned, exhaling heavily. "They're not just after me. They're hunting wolves and people." Victor felt a chill run through him. The wolves, who had stood nearby all this time without approaching, now lowered their heads, letting out an almost inaudible growl. He understood. This story was just beginning. Victor and Leah hurried back to the cabin, moving as fast as they could. The wolves followed, casting wary glances around them. They entered, locked the door, and Victor immediately started a fire in the hearth. Leah sank heavily into a chair, still clutching her injured arm. The lamplight illuminated her face, pale, with a flicker of apprehension in her eyes. "Now talk." Victor leaned against the table, crossing his arms. "Who are they?" Leah was silent for a few seconds, as if gathering her thoughts. "Poachers," she finally said. "They're hunting wolves, but not just that." Victor frowned. "Explain." Leah took a breath, looking towards the fireplace. "I was studying the pack, tracking their movements, recording data on their numbers, migration routes, interactions within the group. It was important for me to understand their habits, especially in light of changes in the ecosystem. I noticed that recently they had started moving erratically, as if avoiding something, and sometimes even completely changed their usual routes. Yesterday, I stumbled upon a hunter's camp. They were well armed, operating with organization. They had professional gear, clearly not just for typical poaching. I hid behind a rock and listened. One of them, seemingly the leader, said. She hesitated, then looked Victor directly in the eyes. Leave this one. He'll lead us to him. They deliberately left the wolf injured. It wasn't an accident. I saw their faces. They knew exactly what they were doing. Victor felt something clench inside him. He remembered the injured wolf, how it had come straight to his cabin. So it wasn't a coincidence. They knew the wolf would lead them to the pack, he murmured. Leah nodded. Yes, they left him alive, thinking he would lead them to other wolves. But the wolves were smarter. They came here, to you. So now you're in the game, too. Victor ran a hand over his face. This all felt like a trap. The wolves hadn't come here just for warmth. They knew something important. Leah leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping to a whisper. There's one man among them, she said. The others are afraid of him. They call him the Hunter. I saw how even the most ruthless poachers looked at him with apprehension. He's different. Victor tensed. His throat felt dry. That name. No, not a name. A title. Did you hear his name? His voice was hoarse. Leah shook her head. No, just how they spoke of him. As a man who cannot be defied. He knows these woods better than anyone. He doesn't just hunt. He plays. Victor closed his eyes. Old memories he had tried to bury surged back with renewed force. The Hunter, he knew him. Couldn't forget him. Their paths had crossed long ago, in a different forest, under different circumstances. Back then, Victor was naive, believing the wilderness belonged to all who respected its laws. But the Hunter saw the world differently. For him, nature was an arena where rules were dictated not by instinct, but by force. Their clash back then had left scars, not just on his body, but on his soul. Now the past had caught up with him again, and Victor couldn't help but wonder, this time, would things end differently? Do you know who he is? Leah asked quietly. Victor remained silent. In every fiber of his being, he felt the danger. And if this Hunter was here, then everything Victor had left behind had now returned for him. Night wrapped the forest in a cold shroud. The cabin was quiet, but Victor wasn't asleep. Neither was Leah. They both knew the calm was just an illusion. Outside, something had changed. The forest wasn't silent. On the contrary, the stillness was filled with anticipation. The wolves, who had been lying by the hearth, suddenly lifted their heads, their ears twitching nervously. Then one of them, the injured one, slowly stood and headed towards the door. It didn't snarl, made no sound, but Victor felt the tension. Something's wrong, Leah whispered. Victor slowly reached for his rifle, listening. Outside, a faint crunch of snow. Then another. Someone was approaching. He gestured for Leah to stay put, then slid to the window. Carefully, he unlatched the shutters and peered out. 4 silhouettes, moving slowly, carefully, clearly not wanting to be seen. Each held a weapon, handled with the confidence of someone who knew how to use it. Victor narrowed his eyes. They wore camouflage jackets, masks, but most importantly, their steps weren't haphazard. They knew what they were doing. They moved methodically, checking their surroundings, bypassing potential hiding spots. They were looking for something, or someone. Their movement resembled a sweep of the area before an assault. These weren't just poachers. They were predators. "Get away from the window," Victor whispered, stepping back. "They're armed." Leah tensed. "Is it them?" she whispered. "I don't know, but something tells me yes." One of the wolves let out a low growl. Victor looked at it. The animal was staring at the door, its fur bristling, muscles coiled. A knock. They were no longer trying to be silent. Victor and Leah froze. "Anyone home?" A voice boomed from outside, deep, masculine, with no trace of fear. No one answered. "We know you're in there," a second voice, hoarser and rougher, called out. "Let's not make this difficult." Leah looked at Victor. He shook his head. They wouldn't open it. A whisper drifted from outside. "Think he's inside? The hunter wants him alive." Victor felt a chill spread through him. They were looking for him. This wasn't an accident. Not the wolves. Him. "He's definitely here, and it's time for him to pay an old debt," a third voice said softly. Leah flinched, trying to make out their words. Victor clenched his jaw. He knew what debt they were talking about. "We need to go," he whispered, "right now." Leah nodded. Victor glanced at the wolves. One was already by the back wall of the cabin, as if it knew the escape route. Outside, the men moved toward the door, the click of a rifle bolt. They were ready. "Come on," Victor whispered. Leah was already at the back exit. He followed her, feeling adrenaline surge through his veins. They moved cautiously, trying not to leave tracks on the crisp snow. The wolves followed them, silent as shadows, their eyes gleaming in the dark. Only when they stepped out into the night did Victor realize the trap had sprung. In the distance, the snapping of twigs, then muffled voices. They were being pursued. He caught Leah's gaze. Her face was tight, but resolute. Now they weren't just running. They had to survive. Victor and Leah moved quickly, weaving through the trees. The cold air burned the lungs, and the snow crunched underfoot. But they tried not to leave discernible tracks. The wolves kept pace, moving silently, as if they knew the route in advance. Victor felt their tension, and it only intensified his own unease. They stopped in a small hollow, hidden among the trees. Victor leaned against a trunk, catching his breath. Leah looked at him. Her face was pale, but determined. "You know who they are, don't you?" she asked. Victor was silent for a few seconds. Memories he'd tried to bury hammered in his head. Leah was right. He knew. "One of them," he finally said. "I met him before, a long time ago." Leah frowned, but didn't interrupt. Victor ran a hand over his face, shaking off the weariness. "It was years ago. I was working as a park ranger then. We had an operation, searching for missing hikers during a blizzard. There was a guy in our group, Anthony, a good tracker, experienced but too overconfident. He always pushed ahead, never listened to orders." Victor swallowed. The memories returned too vividly. The whiteout, the howling wind, the cold seeping into every cell of his body. "The storm hit us faster than we expected. We got separated, and then I heard Anthony scream. I found him. He was trapped, buried in the snow. His leg was jammed between rocks. I tried to help, but the blizzard was getting worse. Visibility dropped to 0. Radio contact failed." He paused, his fingers clenching into a fist. "I couldn't rescue him. I tried, but I had to leave. I left him there. I heard him screaming at my back, and I left. When the rescue party returned a day later, there were no traces. He was presumed dead." Leah didn't look away. She waited for him to say what she already understood. "But he survived," she said softly. Victor nodded. Then, looking away, he uttered, "He called himself the Hunter." Even back then, said a real tracker doesn't just see the path but the prey. He loved the hunt, not for the kill, but for the process. Leah froze. Her eyes widened, her breathing hitched. "Wait," she whispered, as if collecting her thoughts. "The hunter? The leader of the poachers?" Victor nodded. His heart thumped, dull and heavy. "Yes, and now he's here." Leah clenched her teeth, glancing at the forest. The wolves stood frozen nearby, their ears twitching as if they heard something a human couldn't. "He doesn't just want to kill you," she said. "He's playing a game." Victor sighed. Yes, he understood that. This wasn't just revenge. It was a hunt. "They left the wounded wolf," Leah continued. "What if they knew he wouldn't go to his own pack so as not to endanger them? Wolves are very clever. What if they knew the wolf would seek another refuge with someone who has lived for many years alongside them in the forest, with the hermit in the cabin?" "Meaning me," Victor corrected softly. Leah looked at him. He always smiled even when we knew the situation was hopeless. Victor continued, remembering Anthony. "He was the one who joked even in a blizzard. And now he's here, and he's not smiling." Victor looked back at the animals. They still stood alert, but now their gaze was directed not at the forest, but at him. They weren't just watching. They knew what was coming next. Silence hung between them. Leah hugged herself, as if trying to keep warm, then nodded. "If that's true," she paused, "then we have no choice. We have to face him." Victor slowly exhaled. He didn't want this, but he knew it was inevitable. In the distance, the crunch of branches. The wolves didn't flinch. They knew who was coming. Victor understood it too. The forest fell silent. Even the wind died down, as if nature itself was holding its breath before the storm. Victor and Leah stood among the trees, backs pressed against the trunks. The wolves moved alongside them, their fur bristling, ears twitching in tension. They sensed it. A rifle bolt clicked, then another. "We know you're here." The voice was low, heavy, with a hint of mockery. "Come out, or we'll find you." Victor tightened his grip on his knife. His body remembered what it meant to be a rescuer, but this time he wasn't saving. He was fighting. "They're surrounding us," Leah whispered. "4 on the left, 2 on the right." Victor glanced at them, waiting for a command. At that moment, one of the hunters made a mistake, stepping too close. The wolves attacked. A roar ripped through the silence. The pack moved as a single, deadly mechanism. The first hunter didn't even have time to react. A wolf knocked him down, its fangs closing on his arm. Another tried to fire, but in the same second, the second beast leaped at his chest. Panic spread among the poachers, their formation broken. "Now!" Victor yelled. He and Leah surged forward. Victor struck one hunter on the temple with the hilt of his knife, sending him unconscious. Leah darted aside, splashing flammable liquid onto the snow. She threw scraps of fuel-soaked cloth onto the snow, then ignited them with a lighter. Fire erupted. Tongues of flame shot skyward, creating a fiery barrier. The hunters retreated, staring in confusion at the raging fire, and there he was, the hunter, Anthony. He stood beyond the line of fire, his face calm, but his eyes dark, cold. "So, you chose this path, Victor?" His voice was almost mocking. "I thought you were smarter. Still playing your hunt, Anthony?" Victor clenched his fists. "But this isn't just a game anymore." Anthony tilted his head as if studying him. Then he stepped forward, crossing the line of fire. His movements were confident. Carelessness was alien to him. "You left me to die," he said, "but I survived. I became who I was meant to be." "You became a monster," Victor replied softly. Anthony smirked and lunged. Their clash was swift, knives flashing, quick movements. Victor blocked a thrust, grabbed Anthony's arm, but Anthony was strong. He pulled Victor aside, knocking him into the snow. "You can't change the past," Anthony yelled, raising his knife. Victor remembered the blizzard, remembered the choice he'd faced back then, to leave or to die with his partner. He had chosen to survive. Now he made a different choice. He dodged, grabbed Anthony's wrist, and sharply twisted it, forcing the knife from his hand. Victor pushed him, sending him to the ground. Anthony gasped for breath, but didn't try to get up. He looked at Victor, and there was no fear in his gaze. Victor felt his heart pound in his chest. He looked at the man he had once known and tried to see the Anthony who had laughed in the face of a blizzard. But now before him was a predator, just like the wolves, only they killed for survival. Anthony for sport. "You left me, and I realized man is nothing before nature," Anthony continued, breathing heavily. "I survived because I became a part of it." Anthony sneered, looking at Leah. "And you, I see, are with him now? Amusing. I thought you knew who your real friends were." Leah didn't answer. Her gaze flickered to Victor, but he didn't take his eyes off Anthony. At that moment, the wolves moved closer. Anthony let out a hoarse laugh. "You think they'll kill me?" Victor looked at the wolves. Their eyes gleamed in the firelight. They were waiting. "I don't choose for them," Victor said. "They'll decide themselves." Anthony tried to stand, but one of the wolves stepped closer, a growl, low, menacing. Anthony froze. Victor turned away, but he heard the snow crunch under paws. Then silence. Leah walked up to him, tears in her eyes, but she said nothing. Through fire and snow they vanished into the night, leaving Anthony alone with the wolves. They walked in silence, not looking back. The tracks in the snow quickly disappeared, covered by the night wind. But Victor knew their decision would stay with them forever. The fire in the cabin fireplace slowly died down, leaving only glowing embers. Victor and Leah sat silently, warming themselves by its heat, listening to the sounds beyond the walls, where the forest rose, now seeming less menacing than before. They had left, abandoning Anthony and his men to their fate, but the silence embracing them hinted this forest had seen too much blood, too many who thought they could dominate it. Now it had delivered its own verdict, accepting some and rejecting others, and its judgment was impartial. "Do you think they—" Leah didn't finish the sentence, but Victor understood. He tossed a branch into the fire, watching it ignite and scatter into sparks. Victor's gaze lingered on the smoldering embers, feeling the tension slowly recede in his chest. How many times had he wondered if he could have acted differently? But the wilderness left no room for doubt. It decided who to accept and who to leave behind. He raised his head, inhaled the frosty air, and finally said, "They knew what they were getting into." Victor breathed in. Somewhere far off, a howl echoed, but now it didn't seem wild or alien. It was natural, like the wind, like the very breath of the forest. "They accepted you into the pack," Leah said unexpectedly. Victor looked at her, but she simply watched him with a slight understanding in her eyes. "Did they tell you that?" He chuckled. She shrugged, but didn't answer. Victor looked out the window at the night sky. It was the same as he had seen it the day he ventured into this wilderness, but now he felt no emptiness in it. The forest was no longer just his refuge, it was home. Thanks for watching. What do you think of this story? Share your thoughts. Your comments are greatly valued.